Okay. Hello, تمام.
صباح الخير. Good morning.
صباح النور. That's what I know in Arabic.
It's okay, that's enough. I'm Tamam Abu Safi. I'm a senior editor in Al Ayyam newspaper. It's a Delhi Arabic paper in Bahrain. I've been living in Bahrain for the last 27 years. I'm originally from Jordan. My family is Bahraini as well. And I've been working for like several newspapers in Bahrain for the last 20 years, that's to say. And also I've been working for Voice of America, Radio Sawa for 10 years. And then I moved to Monte Carlo for a short period. Then now I'm only focused in my local paper. And it was great to have the opportunity to have this an interview. And hopefully we will get, we'll get a great interview, because this is the first interview, I believe, with the military side from State of Israel.
Well, also from my point of view, it's a great opportunity to talk with you and to have an interview with a country that has, signed a, let's say, peace agreement, although we never had war between us, but a peace agreement between,
yes,
between the countries. I'll just say a few words. I'll introduce myself, and then we can continue whichever way you want to continue the interview. But my name is Tal Kelman. I'm head of the strategic directory in the IDF. I'm actually in charge of all the military strategy, the international cooperation, international relationships of our military to other militaries around the world. And I'm also holding the file of all the Israeli IDF activity vis-a-vis Iran. So quite a wide portfolio, and I think on all three levels we have mutual interests and concerns. I'm originally from the Air Force, a fighter pilot from the Air Force, and for the past 2 years I've been head of this directorate, and a lot of issues on my plate.
Okay, that's good background. I believe with the long experience with the strategy, with all, and I can tell that I'm talking to the right person to mention about the many challenges we right now facing in Middle East in general. Shall I start now?
Yes.
Okay. The first things we're gonna start with peace. Bahrain and State of Israel sign agreement, Abraham, and I would love to hear from your side how you view this agreement between two countries.
Well, I would like to start my answer on a wider view than between the two countries, yeah. Although I think we'll get down to the meaning of the agreement between the two countries, because I think, at least from my point of view and our view of Israel, there's a wider view of what is going on in the Middle East. And I think, we're in a period of time where dramatic changes and dramatic developments are happening in the Middle East, which I think will change the Middle East for many years forward. There is the side of the challenges and there's the side of the opportunities. I want to start with the challenges, if I may, and because I think on the side of the opportunities, the relationship and the agreement signed between Israel and Bahrain is part of a very big, a big dynamic that might, and I hope will develop into a very big opportunity for, let's say, peace and stability and prosperity in the Middle East. But I want to start with a challenge, because I think that, you know, when we get up in the morning as Israel and we look at the Middle East, we used to be a country that was a very young country after, you know, the country was born last century, and we were actually pretty much isolated and surrounded by enemies, and also had quite a few wars and conflicts, very bloody wars and conflicts.
Yes.
And I think that is the reality that's changing. Nowadays, when we look at the Middle East, we think that the biggest challenge to the Middle East is Iran. Iran is the center of gravity of any negative, let's say, dynamic and activities in the Middle East. I want to say that from Israel's point of view, and from my point of view, I have no conflict with the Iranian people. There are 80 million people in Iran, maybe a bit more. As you know, as our concept, we would love them to live in peace and stability and prosperity. The problem is that we have an extreme regime that is, that has the willing to spread the revolution, not only in Iran, but outside of Iran, and is actually prepared to have the Iranian people pay a very high price for tens of years in order to get this to succeed with getting the revolution and the revolution in Iran and out of Iran, and affecting other countries, and trying to build itself as a regional, let's say, superpower, or regional power, not superpower. And the problem is, I think that's a problem for not only for Israel, it's a problem for all the countries in the Middle East that want peace and prosperity. But specifically for Israel, our concern is that we have a regime here that one of its goals is to wipe Israel off the map of the Middle East. So this is something that we cannot obviously sit quietly and let this dynamic happen. And you know, when we look at Israel as at Iran, we don't only see Iran in Iran. We see Iran in Iraq, in Iran and Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. I mean, any area where you see, let's say, unstable sovereignty, then Iran is trying to enter to create influence on civilian and religious side, but also building military capabilities. And slowly, actually, if, you know, 30 years ago, Iran was very far from Israel, nowadays we have the Iranian threat on Israel's borders. So
yes, through Lebanon, correct?
It's not only through Lebanon. It's through Lebanon is the you know, the most let's say long-term Iranian project that now is on our borders. But we have Iranians in Syria, and the Quds Force is building Iran in Syria. We have Iran building capabilities in Iraq and in Yemen, and nowadays that's not on Israel's border.
But also in Gaza, yes, and also supporting Hamas
and in Gaza, yeah. So this is bringing military capabilities and ballistic capabilities closer to Israel and closer to other countries. And we think this is the main negative issue in the Middle East, and this should be the concern not only of Israel, but also for all Israel's partners and friends in the Middle East. And actually, you know, we believe that Iran is a global problem, because at the end of the day, if Iran will achieve nuclear capability, then we will have probably a nuclear race in the Middle East. There are other countries that will try to get to nuclear capability, and this is something that is not the right way to get peace and stability in the Middle East. So that's on the negative side, and obviously we are trying to affect this in many ways, diplomatically, economically, and also militarily, on the military side. And you know, part of my job is to build Israel's military plans and capabilities for conflict with Iran. We do not want a conflict. We do not want a war. We want to solve this problem in diplomatic ways, but we have to be ready, seeing as the other side is very aggressive.
Scenarios.
Yeah, and building its military capability. So that's on one side, and that's actually the, you know, we call this the Shia axis, the axis that is between Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, is sort of a Shia axis that is surrounding us from the north and northeast, and is something that we need to be concerned about. The other issue is what you started asking about, is I think the potential here, because I think that after many years, as I said, Israel started as an isolated country. In the last decade, we signed peace agreements with Jordan and with Egypt. And nowadays we have civilian relationships, economical relationships, and military relationship with those two countries. So that if Israel in the past used to, you know, was built on a concept of defend ourselves by ourselves, we now understand that, and we have adjusted our strategy to also cooperate with our partners, because we have partners in the region. And this is something that I think that is in the mutual interest also of Jordan and also of Egypt. And now the Abraham Accords is the next step. And the agreements that we signed with Bahrain and with the UAE and with Sudan and Morocco, and I hope that in the near future there will be more agreements signed, is actually creating here a potential for, I would say, a moderate axis. There's the Shia extreme axis, and there's a potential for moderate countries, starting from the Gulf, with Bahrain, UAE, maybe in the future, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and even up to Greece and Cyprus, to create, you know, sort of a chain of countries that all have, I think, the same goal, is to have peace, prosperity, and stability in the Middle East. So, and I think that, first of all, that is one of the most important things that happened to Israel in the strategic level for many years. And I think that at the same time, when the Iranian leaders get up in the morning and look at this potential, this is something that is very negative from the Iranian point of view. And I think this is something that can restrain Iran from its aggressive behavior. And due to economical connections and also military connections, can create very positive things for those countries. So at the end of the day, now going back to your question, the relationship between Israel and Bahrain, I think that this is, you know, we should see it in the wider concept. It's a potential for creating a different Middle East. And I hope, and from my point of view, it's obvious that the relationship at the beginning, the past year, started on the civilian side with economical agreements and tourism agreements and other sharing of information, science, but the next step, and I think we're on the verge of having this next step, is also having cooperation between militaries, because I think we have mutual defense issues to talk about.
Okay, if when we were arguing between the time Israel and Egypt signed the peace agreement, and also between Jordan and Israel, different than time today, completely different. Like when you're talking about more than 30 years ago, was different. So today, when you look to Abraham agreements, do you see what's exactly the impact of this agreement in strategy of defense of Israel? Does it make it more strong for you when you have now, you have in this region friends, you have agreement with them, but 30 years, let us to be honest, 30, 40 years wasn't this way. Was many Arabic countries look to Israel, consider Israel as an enemy. Even when there is no conflict, we don't have like we don't have any blood between this side and that side, but still was different. Today, do you see the peace between Israel and Bahrain, Emirat, several countries in the Middle East make the defense of Israel more strong, the position of Israel more strong?
The answer is a big yes, a very big yes, and I think it's probably one of the most, you know, as I said, I think the agreements with Jordan, with Egypt, and then Jordan were the first step, a very important step, because those are countries on our borders.
Yeah.
But since then, I think the Abraham Accords are the most dramatic thing that happened in the past 30 years. And I think that changes the way we look at the Middle East. We are no longer an isolated country that needs to only defend itself by itself. We are a country surrounded by friends, potential future friends that I hope will join, you know, will join the train and have agreements with us. And that means that on the strategic level, we are now all the area of foreign relationships, international cooperation, international relations, cooperating. You know, the Israeli army was built for many years on its, you know, on being very good and closed and on its own capabilities. Nowadays, we have potentials for sharing of intelligence, for sharing information about anti-terror, for sharing training together with other countries. And I think that is a different concept. It's a concept of having not only defending ourselves and our borders, but also having what we call a strategic depth. And I do think that seeing as I think that the negative issue in the Middle East is Iran, and as I said before, Iran is, from Israel's point of view, I don't want to talk on from, you know, I don't know how it's seen in Bahrain, but I think it's not far away. From Israel's point of view, Iran is the most severe problem to our national defense. That's the number one problem to our national defense. So the cooperation, the agreement between our two countries is part of the solution. Now, it's not a solution that won't make Iran disappear, but it creates a balance between, let's say, an extreme regime that is trying to create negative and terror and bring in military capabilities to countries that have strong sovereignty, and Bahrain has a very strong sovereignty and very strong capabilities and very strong economical and military capabilities, and cooperating with other countries. This creates a balance between the negative dynamic and the positive dynamic in the Middle East. So that's why I think that the situation is totally different. But I want to add that we're, I think, and what I hope is that in the next few months, we'll have more countries come forward, and I call it come onto the table with Israel. Because for many years, we've had with some of the countries, you know, things that happen, what I call under the table. But putting it on the table, first of all, creates a very big potential to move forward. And you know, the reality is that I'm sure that that when I start meeting my colleagues from Bahrain and we start talking, we'll understand that there is much bigger potential than any of us imagined before we met together. Because when people meet, you know, opportunities are born and are created. So I think the situation is very different. And I think the second thing is that it's not only bilateral. We want to have a very strong relationship with Bahrain. We want to learn from Bahrain. We want to have mutual discussions on the strategic level, on the military level. But I think the other maybe difference from what happened 30, 40 years ago, that nowadays we can sit on a table with more than just two partners talking with each other. It's not only Israel and Bahrain, it can be the United States with Israel and Bahrain and UAE and Egypt and Jordan, and hopefully other countries in the future.
Israel, it's a young country, but they build capability military great, capability military with many technologies in Air Force, Navy. How you view the role can Israel play in this region by coalition, with the cooperation with the states of Gulf? How can Israel play a role for defense, this part of Middle East?
Well, I have three parts to my answer. First of all, it's true, Israel, seeing as when we talked about the history and the challenges and the defense challenges, we have very advanced military capabilities. We have a lot of military experience. I'm very sad that that is the situation, but that is the reality that we were born into. And we also have very, very strong military industries. Because our concept when we built the country was that we need to build ourselves in order to defend ourselves by ourselves, then we also built very strong military industries, understanding that we can't always depend on having military capabilities or buying military capabilities outside of Israel. So now I want to go back to the answer. First of all, I think that Israel's military capabilities gives Israel very strong strategic deterrence. I think our enemies are deterred. I think Iran and her proxies, Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iranians in Syria,
militias in Iraq,
they are deterred. If they were not deterred, they might have acted, military against Israel, because these are organizations that have an ideology of wiping Israel off the map. And I think this deterrence is very important for the stability in the region. So I think this is one thing that Israel's military capabilities and Israel's deterrence can bring to a stable Middle East. The second thing is that I think the opportunity of the agreements and the corporations that are now opening on the military, and as I said, we started mainly in civilian, and I hope in the next few months we will open also the what we call mill-to-mill, military-to-military relations. We can start talking about many areas of cooperation. First of all is sharing of intelligence. Israel has a very advanced intelligence. Bahrain has very good intelligence and is closer to part of the region that interests us. So I think sharing of intel can improve the understanding on both sides. That is one area. The second thing is anything to do with defense. We have a lot of experience in defense on the ground, air defense against aircrafts, against missiles, against unmanned aircrafts. And I think this is an area where we have a lot of experience in, and we can explore to see where we can cooperate in. I think the third area is anti-terror, because both countries have, and other countries are very concerned from terror, internal terror that Iran is driving forward. Obviously now after the United States has left Afghanistan, everybody is worried of the terror that might come out of Afghanistan. So I think talking about anti-terror capabilities and cooperating on information and action anti-terror is an area where we could cooperate in. And obviously mutual training. And so that's, I think, the second area of military to military. And the third area that I think our defense and military capabilities is our defense industries. We have very advanced capabilities. It can be defense capabilities. It can be other issues. And I think that the agreements between the countries can create a very close relationship between Israel's defense industries and Bahrain. And you know, if in the future, if you look a few years forward, we will be using similar capabilities, that also enables us to create connection between capabilities and cooperate on real time. So I think that's the three areas. And I think maybe the most important of what I talked about is the cooperation on defense issues, because I think that's the first, you know, as militaries, our first interest is to defend our people. And I think, you know, we are very concerned mainly from aerial defense, defending against ballistic capabilities and unmanned, which are now being used by Iran around the region, like the example that happened in Aramco in Saudi Arabia. I'm sure this is concerning also other countries. And,
yeah.
I think this is an area where we can cooperate in, and we plan to, in the next few months, hopefully meet our colleagues and start talking about how can we do this. And I want to add one more thing on the military level, is that, you know, for many years, the American command that is in charge of the Middle East is the Central Command. Because of the political situation, and that Israel did not have partners in the region, Israel was under the European command, under the responsibility of the European command, and all other countries in the area were under the Central Command. Now that there are partners, we agreed, and this was an American decision, to move us from the European command to the Central Command. So now there is a potential for cooperation, not only of the countries in the region, but also have the United States around the same table, in the same loop. So actually, I think this is a very big potential, that we can have the, let's say, American umbrella and a multilateral relationship, and at the same time have bilateral, Israel with Bahrain, Israel with UAE, Israel with Jordan, Israel with Egypt.
So shall we expect to see a role of Israel in coalition here in the Gulf? There is a coalition under the umbrella of United States with many countries, more than 30 countries from several parts of the world. So shall we expect to see Israel part of this coalition soon?
Well, it's a complicated question, because I will answer. Yeah, I won't avoid the question. I think there is a potential to see Israel in, I'd say, multilateral structures in the region. But, you know, to join such structures needs the agreement of all the partners that join that. So, and there is sensitivity. We understand the situation is that having Israel active in the Gulf is something that I think is very important, but still could be you know, the concept could be sensitive to some of the countries. So I think it's a vision that we can move toward. It will be a gradual process.
Yeah. I'll go back to Iran, exactly. All we look forward to see solution by politics side between Iran about the nuclear issue. But we can see recently Iran, they don't want to go back to the table, to negotiation table, and they try to waste more time. In same time, there is many, like, see, it's Iran, it's became like far from nuclear pump only few months. This is big challenges. What about if the diplomatic side didn't get any solution for this issue? How Israel will deal with this big threats? It's not only threats for Israel, it's threats for all the Middle East. And we can see that Iran just wasting time. They don't go back for negotiations. I just was here, and 2 days ago was a press conference for Mr. Maliani was say, we cannot wait forever for Iran to come back to the negotiation table. But what about Iran? It's now the time, it's benefits for Iran. It's not benefits for others.
Yeah, well, I first of all heard, seeing as I'm in charge of the Iran file here, I heard very clearly what Rob Malley said in the press conference. Yeah. And we're actually following the negotiations and the diplomatic steps that are being made. And I want to say the answer is as this. First of all, because you asked, your question was, what will Israel do? Well, my first statement is that Iran is not only Israel's problem. Iran is a global problem. And that is part of the effort that we need to do is on the Israeli diplomatic side, vis-a-vis partners in the JCPOA, talking about the United States and the Europeans and the Russians and the Chinese, is to understand that it is in the interest of all these countries to have a stable Middle East, and Iran with nuclear capability is not a stable Middle East. So that is the first thing. And so we believe that the main, still, although we see what you said, which means that Iran is not rushing back to the negotiations, we still think that the main vector should be diplomatic. And we think that with the right steps made, some of them have not been made yet, and some of them are diplomatic steps, there need to be decisive diplomatic steps, can bring Iran back to the table to negotiation. Now, from Israel's point of view, the JCPOA is a very bad agreement. The nuclear agreement with Iran should be much better than the JCPOA. It should be longer, meaning
and cover many areas.
And it should be much stronger and broader in other areas. So we think steps on the diplomatic side and on the economical side should be made towards Iran to bring her back to the table and try and create a situation where there's a negotiation on a much better agreement. On the other hand, as Israel, we understand that this might not succeed. And that is why, as we do, and I'm a military guy, we need to prepare ourselves for war and for the failure of diplomatic actions. And as was published already, and Israel published it and talked about it, we are, we had in the past, we have now, and we will have in the future operational plans to act against Iran if needed. And obviously, seeing as Iran is acting aggressively against Israel, this could bring a conflict, nothing to do with the JCPOA or the nuclear agreement. There could be a conflict that can happen from UAVs or from some sort of terror activity that will bring conflict. So that, as I said, Iran is the most serious defense issue on Israel's table, and we are building military capabilities. But I'm saying again, I do not think that's the solution. The solution should be diplomatic, and if not diplomatic, it can be military activity of the international community. It doesn't only have to be Israel. So I think that's the situation. And at the end of the day, I do think that there are ways to deter Iran. There are ways to press Iran and bring it back to the table for negotiations. And there are also ways to bring her to negotiations that at the end of the day can bring a solution that is better than the JCPOA.
Yes. We hope to see political solution when, sorry to say that, I'm not sure if really Iran wants solution or really look for forward solution. And even I agree with you about the agreement was signed before, wasn't really cover many areas, because also Iran is not only nuclear problem, it's special, like when we're talking about the militias working, they follow Iran, like Hezbollah, and even they used to create kind of militias in Bahrain. They try to create militias, but they don't get the full opportunity to do that. This is many things that the first agreement wasn't really covered, because the agreement was only focused in nuclear, but wasn't really defense. Sorry to say that. This is my boy. He has to say hi to everyone I do interview with him. Say hi, Mama.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, Mama, خلاص. Okay. Since COVID-19, because they study at home, so the school it's in my home now. So every time I do interview through Zoom, so he has to say hi. He said hi to many ambassadors, to many people.
So he's going to be a diplomat in the future.
Yes, hope so. I hope so. Maybe someday I will get the opportunity to study in Israel. I hope that, because
I would be more than glad. So if I just want
yes, especially with the medical, yeah.
I just want to add to what you said. I mean, you know, the JCPOA is an agreement on only one part of the problem. That is part of what the issue that we are talking to all our partners. Iran, you know, when we look at the Iranian problem or the Iranian challenge, first of all, there's an extreme regime, which is problem number one. Under that, we have the nuclear issue, but we have also two more very big issues with Iran. One is the regional entrenchment and the regional proxy, building proxy forces outside of Iran. We call that regional entrenchment. And the third issue is Iran's military force buildup and military industries that are, although they are under economical pressure, are building advanced military capabilities, not only for Iran. They are proliferating these armaments to their proxies in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon and in Yemen. So that when you look at the Iranian problem, you need to look at the whole issue. So the JCPOA, or not the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement will be a first step of solving, if we manage to get to a longer and stronger agreement, will be a first step in solving or postponing or restraining one of the challenges. There are other challenges. Now, I want to say here that I think the opportunity that there is nowadays is that, seeing as we are now talking with countries in the Gulf due to the Abraham Accords, that we can coordinate our messaging towards the international partners. And if all the countries, or the most dominant countries from the Gulf, and Israel and Jordan and Egypt will talk to the European countries, to America, and saying we have I'd say a better potential of being, you know, more aligned on the diplomatic side, and that way pushing these countries, pushing these partners to act diplomatically in the right way. And the second thing is to cooperate also on the military and defense issues that we talked about to deter Iran, because, you know, at the end of the day, part of the solution when you have a very aggressive opponent is to deter him. That he gets up in the morning and he believes that if he will act, he will pay a price, which is very high, that then he will calculate if to act or not. That is, you know, the concept of deterrence. And I think the next stage of deterrence is not only the personal Israeli or Bahraini deterrence, it's the combined deterrence that we can build here.
I want to end with this because I know maybe you are busy later on. So every time Iran getting a pressure in nuclear issues, negotiations table, or with the situation, try to move their proxy to create war or to create problems. Like every time when you pressure Iran move by move their proxy to do war or to create any kind of issue, like Hezbollah. Many times when you pressure Iran, we see Hezbollah try to create war with Israel, or Gaza, or using the Hamas to create war for this. So how you view now the situation in Lebanon with all we know, like Lebanon is being controlled by Hezbollah, and the community there it's really suffering from Hezbollah. But is it how you think it's the threats now coming from Iran? It's good. There is largest threats coming from Iran this time, especially if the international community try to take any step against Iran. Do you expect anything coming from Lebanon side?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, I'm talking as a military guy. We are getting ready for all scenarios, so that we understand nowadays that if we have a conflict with Iran, it's not only with Iran in Iran, it will be with some of its proxy forces in the region, and that's the scenarios that we are preparing our army for, and we have very, very advanced and very decisive capabilities. Obviously, again, we do not want war, and as I said for Iran, I have no conflict with the Lebanese people.
Yes.
It's actually, you know, pretty surreal, because I think we could have had such a good relationship in a very beautiful area. But this is part of the Iranian project. This is part of the negative, and Hezbollah is the most advanced proxy project that Iran built.
Yes.
And I think Lebanon is paying a price for this Iranian activity. And I think Lebanon, you know, I don't know to define, you know, when does a country, Lebanon is very close to collapsing as a country. Very close to collapsing. And it's very, you know, collapsing is not a point where you or collapse or not collapse. I think that we see the economical situation in Lebanon, and we see the, you know, the tension between all the actors in Lebanon. They are paying a very, very big price for the project of Hezbollah. And at the end of the day, Hezbollah is controlling Lebanon from behind. It's the most dominant actor in Lebanon. It's holding Lebanon, you know, by the throat.
Yes.
And that is why, from Israel's perspective, we say that we are, obviously, when there is humanitarian situation, we are very much positive for humanitarian aid towards the Lebanese people. We've also, as Israel, offered Lebanon for the past year humanitarian aid, but we have had negative answers. But at the same time, we say that reconstruction of Lebanon, putting in international aid to Lebanon, must be conditioned on steps against, or steps that restrain Hezbollah's building its military, building its precise guided missile capability. Lebanon cannot be paid by international aid, because we must realize that any money that goes into Lebanon at the end of the day will go to Hezbollah. It will not go to education, it will not go to health, it will not go to the civil servants. So that's the situation, the complex situation. We are obviously, we have very high deterrence towards Hezbollah. That's why Hezbollah is not acting against us. I think, you know, in 2006, we had a war with Lebanon.
Yeah.
Hezbollah knows that the next war will be much more destructive to Lebanon than the 2006. And it will actually ruin Lebanon. So I think Hezbollah has no interest to act against Israel. But we must assume that in any situation of conflict with Iran, we might have Hezbollah as an actor in the conflict. That's what we need to get ready for. So it's a complicated situation. It's a complicated answer, but that's the situation nowadays. I do not know what will develop in Lebanon, but I do think that in the near future, I think Hezbollah is very concerned from the internal situation in Lebanon. But that's why keeping the pressure and the economical pressure on Iran is important from Israel's point of view, because releasing the economical pressure on Iran immediately means budget going to the nuclear program, budget going to Iran's military capabilities, but also budget going to the Quds Force in Syria and to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Yeah, yeah.
So
we've been here. Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I finished my sentence.
Okay, we've been here by news that many times that Israel attack some locations in Syria. Could I just get like more information about that? Like, who exactly Israel attack in Syria? Because I know no civilians, not civilian. We know exactly what the locations they target, but I need to hear it from you. Like sometimes, like we hear from the news, Israel made some military operations against some places in Syria. Who you attack exactly there?
Well, I will answer you like this. First of all, I cannot comment on any military action that Israel did in Syria. I will tell you this. Since 2011, the beginning of the civilian war in Syria, Iran saw another opportunity of a, I'd say, failed state or a weak sovereign state, and immediately started to act by creating political and civilian influence, but also bringing military capabilities into Syria and using Syria as a bridge between Iran to Lebanon.
Yeah.
So that nowadays we have Iranian proxies that are led by the Quds Force, the Iranian Quds Force, that are bringing military capabilities via Syria to Lebanon, but are also building military capabilities in Syria. And that is a situation which is very, very negative from Israel's point of view. And we are determined to do any, determined to avoid the situation, because now I'm going back to Hezbollah. You know, after the 2006 war, Israel, at the end of the war, came back to the international line and signed an international agreement, the 1701 UN agreement resolution, which when you read the agreement, it's an amazing agreement. It means that south of Lebanon is free from any military capability, terror organization, but there is no similarity between the agreement and reality. So that the Syrian arena is an arena that, Iran is trying to build Hezbollah 2.0 in Syria. That's what they've been trying to do for the past 10 years. And that is something that is very negative from Israel's point of view. That's what I can say.
Okay. Thanks for your time. Really, I appreciate this interview. Hopefully it will be published Sunday. If there is any information, any things, I'm gonna contact Mrs. Ella. And really, I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to, conclude and say that I think, we talked a lot about the challenges, but my main message here is the big opportunity that there is here. I think it's really a dramatic and historic opportunity between the two countries and with the region. And I hope to see, and I do feel from what I have managed to meet people from Bahrain in the past few months, is that Bahrain is, very like-minded with Israel. And I think I want to say that I hope that Bahrain can also be active in bringing other partners or other actors in the region that have not come onto the table with Israel yet to the table as soon as possible, because I think it's both our interests. And I invite you to Israel and hope we have the next interview in Israel or in Bahrain.
I hope so. Hope so. And I wish to see you, inshallah, soon in Bahrain. We wish to see that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
National